Hello, hello. I am your co host for today, Dr. Carrie Jones, and I am beyond excited to introduce to you Dr. Lisa Mosconi. She is at the forefront of neuroscience and women's health. In fact, she has her PhD in both neuroscience and nuclear medicine. Now, she's quite the scientist and also a best selling author. She is the author behind Brain Food, which is all about nutrition in the brain. She is the author behind XX Brain, which is about the female brain and Alzheimer's. And we are talking about her newest book, The Menopause Brain, which I think is going to hit home for a lot of you. I mean, it's safe to say that the brain is her forte. And we go into all the things that happen to a woman in her brain when she goes through perimenopause and menopause. And it's a lot more than you think up there in the neurological area. In fact, she talks about the neuroendocrine system so much and how much they are so intricately connected. And most importantly, what can we do to help support our brain through this entire transition? She is a wealth of information. It is a fantastic book. And if you are struggling with any of those common symptoms of menopause, such as brain fog, fatigue, hot flashes, night sweats, depression, anxiety, mood changes, any of the things, definitely pick up the book, but listen to this podcast. She's going to really, pun intended, blow your mind. Dr. Lisa Mosconi, thank you so much for coming on the Root Cause Medicine podcast. It is an absolute honor to talk about your newest book, which hits home for me, The Menopause Brain. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Very happy to be here.
One of the quotes in your book, and this is how I want to start it out because it's one of my absolute most favorite, you stay in there. Menopause is not a disease, illness, or pathologic condition. It is a transition. It doesn't need curing or fixing. It does need addressing or managing if necessary. And that's where I want to start off the podcast today, and how you come to that approach when it comes to the menopausal brain.
That's a really good question. And I find it very timely because the Lancet series that was just published that went viral on social media, even my chairman was sending me emails about that. Like, how do you feel about this study, about this opinion piece? And we spent some time thinking about this. And for me, as a woman and as a brain scientist, I grappled with these different definitions of menopause throughout my career, because if you look at medical textbooks, menopause is described as a state of estrogen deficiency caused by hypogonadism, in turn caused by ovarian failure. And for years, I'm a scientist. I use those words myself: estrogen depletion, ovarian degradation. And when I started writing books and talking to actual women, also when I hit 40, to be honest, I started thinking about my own menopause as well. And I thought, what do you mean ovarian failure? There's no failure there. This is a biologically programmed event, which is exactly the same as puberty and pregnancy. The outcomes are different, the experience is different, of course, but biologically speaking, menopause is certainly not a disease. It's not chronological aging either, right? So menopause belongs to a unique category of biological events that in science, not in medicine, but in science, are called neuroendocrine transition states, right? It's its own category of events that literally only include puberty, pregnancy, perimenopause, which is the transition to menopause for women, and then andropause for men. And it's like a little bit of a hybrid, right? Because it's part of neuroendocrine aging, not chronological aging, which is important because aging just sort of happens to you, but neuroendocrine aging is programmed. At some point in a woman's life, her ovaries will run out of follicles by design, and our bodies and brains will go through a transition, will go through a change that is necessary for women to stop being reproductive, but remain markedly productive, as any woman over 52 can attest. So that is an important distinction, because it's a terminology that is not widely used for menopause. What is menopause? It's a neuroendocrine state. It's a neuroendocrine transition, or just a transition. I think it's really important because, number one, depathologizes the process. It's not a disease. You're not sick. You're not going crazy, to your point, right? You're not losing your mind. However, these transition states do come with vulnerability. They increase the risks for certain medical conditions or medical events that should not be downplayed or dismissed because this is aging, right? So it reframes menopause in a way that I believe is more accurate, is scientifically valid, is accurate, but also validates women's experiences as being important and worthy of clinical attention and sometimes intervention.
There's so many ways we could go. Two of the things you said to start with: one, menopause is a neuroendocrine process or a neurologic process largely, and yet we in medicine, not science, but medicine and in the general public, focus on the ovaries. And the second thing you said was so much of medicine and society focuses on reproduction, and that's it once you go through menopause, almost as if your worth or your definition of being a woman or maybe how you rate yourself is now, quote unquote, come to an end. And in your book, the way you write it is so wonderful. First of all, women are way more beyond reproduction. But second, nobody in medicine looks at the neuroendocrine, meaning brain to endocrine system, or ovaries fall in that system. And I would love for you to expound on that, because so many women do feel crazy and are having so many symptoms around the brain, but everyone's just micro focused on down in the ovaries.
Yes, absolutely. I think as a society, we have really only focused on half of what menopause is all about, right? The reproductive half. And because of a combination of ageism and sexism and menopausism, the whole focus is on the negatives that this transition can bring. And there's a tendency to really think of women as having to remain forever youthful, right? And it's almost like your worth is one and only as long as you're able to have children, you're attractive. And once you no longer are able to, then you're not. And this is a very patriarchal vision or interpretation of what a woman is to start with, I would say. So what I would love all women to know is that we are born with a neuroendocrine system that is a very powerful network in our bodies, connecting our brain to the ovaries and all the other glands of the hormonal system in between. And this network is very special. In part, it's very energetically expensive to have because it gets activated during puberty, right? When our brains start telling our ovaries, and the ovaries are telling our brains that we are ready to really blossom and become women and potentially become mothers. And at that point, women do develop a menstrual cycle. And what's important to realize is that every time the ovaries cycle, the brain microcycles. There are things that happen in the brain, which are not like an explosion or anything. They're very subtle effects. But they do happen in sync with the menstrual cycle, where when estrogen is higher in the ovaries, in the bloodstream, and therefore in your brain, your neurons are plumber. They sprout connections. They become better interconnected. They have more energy. There's more blood flow that goes up to the brain. There's more neuroprotection. There's more neuroimmunity. There's more plasticity. These are all these beautiful things that do happen. Why? Because you're preparing for ovulation and you need to be ready to go. And this is really a biological response, which is gentle, obviously, but it does occur. And if you don't get pregnant, then everything kind of comes down, right? And your brain cycles out of this peak of brain power in a way until you get pregnant. If you choose, right, should you choose to become pregnant, let's say the woman gets pregnant, then the neuroendocrine system is overactivated because so many things need to happen. And think about it, there's changes in body temperature regulation because you need to increase your body temperature. You have a bun in the oven, right? You need to host the pregnancy. And there's changes in mood, there's changes in concentration, there's changes in memory. Some women feel them more, some women don't feel them at all. But this is the neuroendocrine system. The functionality is to support and boost reproductive fertility, while also rewiring your brain to make it stronger to host the pregnancy. And then everything kind of comes undone as women go through menopause. Menopause is the biological clue for your body and your brain to kind of close down shop. We're not longer going to have any babies here, and we need to reorganize ourselves. A lot of these connections that are important for fertility and reproduction can actually be discarded, they can be eliminated. And this leads to a rewiring in the brain that is important, is biologically programmed, but can also increase vulnerability. And that's why many women experience hot flashes. It's the same system that was able to raise your body temperature to support the baby and keep it warm is now a little bit in a flux. And that's one reason that we have the hot flashes and the night sweats. And then some women experience depressive symptoms or sleep issues and the brain fog and the memory lapses. So once you look at this from a whole body perspective and thinking there's a reason for this to happen, it's no picnic, but there's a reason, then I think that is empowering and validating and takes a little bit of the fear and the mystery away and out from menopause, which I think is really important to break the stigma and really give women some peace of mind to go through this transition in a positive and empowered way.
When reading your book, I don't think even I realized how much the brain remodels itself. I knew in puberty, and I guess I would have assumed in pregnancy, should somebody choose to get pregnant, but I didn't realize, as you describe all the remodeling, both just now and in your book, how much we go through. And I think this is a huge reassurance because obviously for a long time, we were taught the brain is what it is. It's pretty static and it doesn't remodel, it doesn't change, it doesn't grow. It can shrink, but that's about it. And now, and I think of like some of us who maybe have an overstuffed closet, and we go in and we clean out our closet and streamline our closet. You know, there's a shift. And one, we're really excited. It's a good thing. And on the other hand, now we go in our closet and think, well, where are those shoes? What did I do with those shoes? And in the brain, this is how I thought of it when you describe it. There's a whole remodeling. And you go through menopause, you don't need to have the brain of somebody who needs to wake and wait and listen for an infant. But in the flux, you may also get hot flashes or night sweats or sleep disturbances. Is that an okay analogy?
It's perfect. And that's exactly the way I think about biology. There's pros and the cons. And if you're a brain, that's just part of being a brain that is deeply connected with ovaries. The cycle every month, and that at some point stop cycling. And that's a perfect analogy. I like to say that this is a chance for the brain to get leaner and meaner because all these connections that the brain needs to have to sustain a menstrual cycle and the potential pregnancy are very metabolically expensive. So it really makes sense that you get to a point in your life where if those are not needed, it's best to give them away, like your shoes. From a brain perspective, that makes a lot of sense. And I would like to say this is my personal interpretation of what menopause may or may not be, right? From a neurological perspective, some people do think that menopause is actually a terrible thing for women and that there's absolutely no value for it. And that it goes against the theory of evolution and all this stuff that biology is based on. So I think it's important to acknowledge that some people will not agree, but I find that a lot of women are like, actually, this makes sense. And I can relate to this kind of framework that is based on genetics and evolutionary theories, and also seem to make a lot more sense from a humanistic perspective.
Yeah. No, I definitely, again, after with reading your book, the whole time I thought this makes so much sense. And you are a brain researcher. This is what you do for decades.
I've been a neuroscientist for ever since I was 18. I was very fortunate to immediately start running my own experiments when I was in college. And I come from a family of scientists. My parents are nuclear physicists, both of them, and their students, some of their students transferred to nuclear medicine, and they would babysit me. So I've been exposed to science my entire life. And I feel that this is a good interpretation. You never know in science, but I do think that there's validity, and I think it's a very new and very novel topic in neuroscience. Not a lot of people know about this. Not a lot of people study this specific aspect of women's brain health, but I think it's becoming more and more popular.
You mentioned that brain research historically, when it was on women, was done rather postmenopausally.
Men.
Well, on men, of course, or men or male rats or male mice. But if they did study a woman, it was much later in life. And so they could see what would happen in their 60s or 70s or 80s, but nobody was actually studying what happens to us in our 30s or our 40s or 50s or through that entire transition. And that's the key critical point.
Yes, for decades, women of childbearing potential were excluded from research, and that's any woman from puberty through the postmenopausal years. So the vast majority of research was carried out using men as the stereotype for everything, or male animals, based on the interpretation that female hormones made female animals too difficult to study. Imagine that. And so a lot of the data that we have and that we still use today in medicine and in pharmacology really comes from studies that were almost exclusively done on men. And that is a problem because obviously women are not men. Men don't have a menstrual cycle. Men don't go through menopause. And so all the data that we have may not actually apply to over half of the population.
And our brains aren't the same.
Right. So women's brains are not the same as men's brains, but they haven't been studied. So the assumption in neuroscience, which is quite frustrating for me as a scientist, is that really sex differences do not matter when it comes to brain function, except there's some ovaries in there, right? So when it comes to reproduction, yes, we do have to study men and women separately, but for everything else, let's just lump them together and use statistical procedures to remove the effects of gender. This is standard studies in my field and also in the field of neurology, which actually work in neurology. I've always worked in neurology and radiology. And that is terrible. It's called bikini medicine. It's a term I kind of like. It's really stating how, from a medical perspective, what makes a woman is those body parts that can fit under a bikini and nothing else. And that is the mindset that really led research for many, many years, and that I believe created a lot of issues for women's health, women's brain health, for sure, because to this day, women's brain health is one of the most under-researched, underdiagnosed, undertreated, and underfunded fields of medicine. And menopause is probably even worse, which is unacceptable.
And hopefully, I mean, in large part thanks to you, hopefully that's changing. You list some statistics. Women are twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder or depression. Women are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's, 3 times more likely to develop an autoimmune disorder, including those that attack the brain, such as multiple sclerosis. And of course, in the news right now are some well-known actresses struggling with multiple sclerosis. 4 times more likely to suffer from headaches and migraines. Women are more likely to develop brain tumors, such as meningiomas. And women are more likely to be killed from stroke. And yet, the complete lack of brain research on us is appalling. You aside.
I completely agree. And if you note, also suicide rates are higher in women after or around the age of menopause, and so are divorces. And Sure, it's a correlation, but I think it's an important correlation to study, to investigate, and to pay attention to. And you're right that more and more celebrities, but also women, are really open today to talk about not just their medical conditions, but also their menopause. And I find that that's been extremely helpful to so many other women who now feel like they're more visible, they're being heard, than if Gwyneth Paltrow, if Oprah can talk about menopause, then so can I. And this is wonderful, and I think is super helpful. And not for nothing, the government is also, I'm sure you heard about the Women's Health Research Initiative that was launched at the White House just last week, where $12 billion are now allocated or reallocated towards really bridging the gap in women's health research. Let's see how they partition it out. But I think I've been in this field forever. This is the first time. And women have been going through menopause for centuries. So I think there's hopefully a change.
Oh my gosh. Well, I here. I hope you're at the forefront of it. One of the concepts I do want to bring up is, again, brain energy. You mentioned this. What does brain energy mean? How does that relate to a lot of the symptoms women are struggling with? Because I remember reading this paper of yours a long time ago on brain energy and the shift in menopause. And I thought, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of our work is really about validating women's experiences and just providing like hard evidence that women are right. I really like that in a way. But yes, so my specialty is actually in Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's prevention. And the reason that we look at menopause is that menopause appears to be a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Now, what is a risk factor? Because we need to be clear here. So there are things that cause a disease, and then there are things that increase your risk of developing a disease or a condition. Menopause does not cause Alzheimer's or any neurological disorders, but it is a window of vulnerability for your brain, where your brain is left a little bit weaker because it's losing the superpowers, the protective powers of estrogen. And therefore, there's a chance that if you had a medical predisposition or a medical risk, menopause could be the moment, the time where you actually experience the symptoms of that specific predisposition, or you experience some of the signs, or perhaps there's a chance of being diagnosed at that point. But is not causative of disease. What it does in the brain, which we are looking at using brain scans, is that the brain is going through this rewiring and remodeling, which is associated with a decrease in gray matter. Just a small decrease in gray matter over time, like your gray matter gets a little thinner. There's a change in connectivity, where some brain regions are become less connected or are less connected, and other regions are more connected. Okay. And then there's changes in brain energy levels, which we have measured two different ways. The first way is the brain scans you probably have seen. Those are called positron emission tomography, or PET, PET scans, which is my bread and butter, is the nuclear medicine part. In that case, we use ligands or tracers that you inject in the bloodstream. They go up to your brain, and then they attach to different parts of the brain that are doing different things. So that tracer was glucose. It's just glucose, a simple sugar that is labeled with, it's called a radioactive isotope. It's just a teeny tiny little particle that shoots out light. So the glucose goes into your brain, in different brain regions that are very active, energetically active, will pick it up, trap it. And that becomes like a little GPS, because from the outside, we can see the light coming out, and we can take pictures of that light. And then we produce this beautiful, to my mind, images of the brain. I love brain stuff, where some parts of the brain look, you can change the color scale, but usually they look like red and yellow when they're very bright and active, or in dark colors for the regions that are not that active. And what we've seen is that the transition to menopause is associated with a decrease in brain glucose utilization. So it's like your neurons are not working as hard as they used to. They kind of slow down. And they do slow down in brain regions that are involved in cognitive processing, like memory, attention, consolidation, multitasking, concentration. So these changes seem to be involved in some of the symptoms of menopause that women report, in part the hot flashes, but mostly the brain fog.
And this is really common for women to say, I used to be able to multitask and now I can't. I would have said I have a great attention and now I don't. Or just outright, they'll say, what's going on with my brain? Now, if somebody has, let's say they're diabetic or pre-diabetic, so they have in their system naturally higher levels of blood sugar, does that change at all? Can we encourage the brain? Can we force the brain to take up more glucose?
The research hasn't been done. We typically, the women in our studies who have diabetes or pre-diabetes are also medically controlled, because diabetes impacts the brain scans that we were just talking about. So this is what's really upsetting to me as a woman. In 2017, the brain imaging study that you were reading, that was the first study using brain scans to look at women who were premenopausal, perimenopausal, early postmenopausal. And as of today, we have done a bunch more, and other people, thank goodness, have replicated our findings.
It's always good.
Oh my goodness. So most other people are using MRI. They're looking at volume. So they confirm that gray matter is reduced during the transition to menopause and after menopause relative to before menopause. And I'm hoping to see more PET studies and brain energy studies. The other thing we have done is to use a different technique that's called spectroscopy, magnetic resonance spectroscopy, where you can actually measure ATP production directly in the brain. And ATP is the cellular source of energy for the entire body and brain. So ultimately, you want ATP more than glucose. And what studies have shown is that there's a higher ATP expenditure in women's brains. It's like it looks like our brains are under stress and make ATP and just burn it constantly to try and compensate, probably for the changes in estrogen concentration, which is very interesting. I would love to be able to do more research. We're very fortunate that we have so many women who would like to come work with us. We only have this many grants, unfortunately, and it's a pity.
Hopefully, with the initiative that came through last week, that will give a boost to this area of science and help.
Yeah, hopefully. And it takes a village. I hope that more and more scientists will start doing the same and will start looking at menopause. It's really tricky to do, to be honest, because we are funded to do research in Alzheimer's disease. But there are very few grants that are given for research on menopause specifically. So you have to come at it from from the sidelines, like, oh, I'm doing Alzheimer's prevention. I'm also doing menopause as part of that. But it's really weird. So I'm hoping things will change, that more and more scientists will be able to do this kind of research.
Well, actually, let me ask you this, and you do talk about this in the book. If somebody has brain fog, if somebody listening to this is really struggling with that, obviously everyone panics, myself included, of, oh, here comes dementia. That's the next step. What's that risk like, or how much truth is there to that?
Well, the truth is that 60% or more menopausal women, perimenopausal and postmenopausal women, experience brain fog. Now, brain fog is a strange clinical symptom in that you can't measure it easily. Like, there's no fog in your brain. There isn't something I can easily quantify. So the way we've been trying to characterize it is by using cognitive testing and brain imaging and looking at, okay, what kind of cognitive tests better capture these feelings, these symptoms, these reports, and what are the neurophysiological correlates. And I think what like the take-home message is that having brain fog during menopause is actually part of going through menopause, right? For some women, it may be a sign of an Alzheimer's risk. But if you think about it, over 60% of women experience brain fog, but only, in quotes, 20% of women develop Alzheimer's disease, right? So clearly there's other factors at play. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind because it is unsettling. I hear that all the time. Like people come to us, to the Alzheimer's prevention clinic, because they're terrified that they might be developing early onset dementia. And they feel much better when we say, actually, it's menopause at this stage, but let's take a look at the brain. Let's do the cognitive testing. Let's come back over time. Let's make sure that we repeat the assessments. And then if anything becomes a red flag for Alzheimer's, then we start talking about Alzheimer's prevention, or let's just start talking about Alzheimer's prevention now anyway, if there's anything that's out of balance, right? We look at all the different risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, and if you check a number of boxes already, let's just start talking about prevention, because it's not just about preventing Alzheimer's in the future or reducing the risk in the future. It's also about supporting your brain now that it needs help. And those things are almost the same, except hormone therapy, it depends. It depends, lifestyle, medical health, and possibly some pharmaceutical support if necessary. I think it's important to look at the big picture and know your risks, know your numbers, right? And then think about incorporating brain health as part of your overall healthcare.
One of the lifestyle factors that you talk about a lot is sleep. You've talked about it, of course, multiple times, multiple books, multiple interviews. And I think it's rather unfair that we are already going through this brain remodeling in this transition. And on top of it, a high percent of women seem to struggle all of a sudden with their sleep. They can't fall asleep, they can't stay asleep. And of course, sleep plays a huge role in a lot of things besides just regular energy or mood, but in our brain, how our brain does its job.
Yeah, it's more than 50% of all women starting in perimenopause who report having trouble not only falling asleep, but also staying asleep. There's this sense of overwhelm where you want to crash, you want to close your eyes and go to sleep, and you can't. And when you finally can, at some point you just wake up, usually 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and you can't fall back asleep. And I think it's maddening when that happens repeatedly over time. So I think it's important to understand why that happens and what can help if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, so, of course. Yeah.
So there are very specific parts of the brain that are especially sensitive to estrogen levels. The reason being that estrogen alone doesn't quite matter. What really matters is the combination of estrogen with an estrogen receptor. So estrogen is like the key that needs to open a lock, and the receptor is the lock. In the brain, women's brains are really full of estrogen receptors, especially in those parts of the brain that are involved in regulating body temperature regulation, sleep and wake, mood, memory, and frontal lobe functionalities like thinking, reasoning, multitasking, language. So what happens during menopause and during perimenopause in particular is that estrogen is all over the place. And these fluctuations are driving the receptors crazy. The receptors are getting mixed messages. So 1 second you're super sleepy and 1 second you're really awake. So that's the first part. The second part is that all hormones work together as a system. So if your sex hormones are out of balance, then your sleep hormones are out of balance and your stress hormones are out of balance. And that's why women's brains have a harder time producing melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, that usually has to withdraw in the middle of the night because the stress hormones are upregulated. The cortisol, the adrenaline really peak around 2 or 3 in the morning for most people. And that's what wakes you up in the morning. So you have a harder time falling asleep and staying asleep. And that is a killer because these changes can last for years. And a lot of women report, so there's the National Sleep Foundation reports that women of menopausal age, midlife women, any woman between 35 and 65 just can't sleep or has trouble sleeping. And it's the sector of the population with the highest percentage of sleep disturbances. So we really need to address it because sleep is so important for overall health, for brain health, for metabolic health, for heart health as well, right? For stress support. So what are things one can do? For some women, having a regular physical activity routine seems to be helpful. Mind-body techniques seem to be helpful, like yoga, Pilates, meditation, like stress reduction in general, deep belly breathing. And then there are some supplements like magnesium can be helpful, melatonin, slow time release melatonin can be helpful. I would stay away from sleeping pills because they don't really help you that much. That's more like a band-aid type solution that doesn't really help in the long term. And then sleep hygiene is helpful. Just try to stay cool at night. And I would say that for women who can't sleep because of hormonal changes and because of the night sweats, right, the hot flashes at night, hormone therapy can be used to support sleep. Is actually an approved off-label indication for hormone therapy use. So this is something to discuss with your doctors.
Which is amazing. And that's definitely when we get into the sort of our next section of what are your favorite things to do, I'm going to ask you about hormone therapy, but I first have to ask you about sleep apnea because I don't think women realize their increased risk for developing sleep apnea as they go into menopause. I once had a sleep doctor many years ago meet with me, and he said, any woman over 40 send to me. I guarantee you a large percent I will diagnose with sleep apnea. He said, I don't want to. I don't mean to. I'm just telling you the change in hormones changes anatomically what happens in the oral cavity and can lead to sleep apnea. And so, what do you see with sleep apnea in the brain at this age?
Right. Well, we see an increase in prevalence after menopause, and that's in part for those two reasons that estrogen receptors are present in respiratory pathways and airways. And they do change a little bit the status of the mucosa, for example, in the sensibility of your palate. There isn't a lot of research done on that, honestly. It's more correlational, but we do know that sleep apnea increases dramatically after menopause and during the transition to menopause already. And the tricky part is that women don't know that they can't breathe at night. And that is a big sleep disruptor, of course. The reason we don't know is that we don't snore as much as men do, right? And so if your husband is snoring, your partner is snoring, he'll wake you up, and that you, woman, would be like, go see a sleep specialist. You have to just have your nose taken care of because I can't sleep. But we don't snore as much. The signs are not as clear. But then you wake up in the morning feeling like trash and you don't know why. So if that is persistent and does not get better with exercise, with relaxation, with supplements, with hormone therapy, it's very helpful to go see a sleep specialist because sleep apnea can be treated. Right now, we have all these different CPAP machines, some of which are very portable. They're not invasive. They don't make noise. They're quite quiet. So it's really, I think it's very important to have an evaluation and treat it if that is your problem. And I would say there's a little bit of stigma around that. Women are supposed to just sleep beautifully like Snow White in a bed of flowers. That is fantasy. It's just, those are fairy tales. The reality is that you need to sleep. So if that means having a little CPAP machine or a big CPAP machine on your face, that's what we're doing.
I love it. I love your candor around this. Yes, absolutely. All right. So, in your book, as we move into what can women do, you have a wealth of information to help women, a lot of resources. And instead of going through all of them, I would just love your top. Like, what what are the things, the most bang for your buck, practical, tactical, when it comes to lifestyle and helping women in this transition that you sort of non-negotiable somehow?
Yeah, it's the one that nobody wants to hear. It's exercise.
Yes.
Exercise. And I fully appreciate that we don't have time for it. It takes commitment, it takes discipline. Most women don't have time, some women don't have energy. But the truth is, if lifestyle is your choice to manage menopause, then exercise is the best researched tool and the one that shows the most consistent effects of all lifestyle techniques. Although right now, the North American Menopause Society recommends cognitive behavioral therapy. So I would say maybe both exercise and CBT as part of behavioral adjustments. And for exercise, what I find really interesting is that different types of exercise seem to be more helpful with different symptoms of menopause. Yeah. So again, in the spirit of not having time, I never have time. My schedule is infernal. It's terrible. So if I'm lucky, I have an hour every day, and I try to maximize that hour to really do things that are helpful to me. So I had to look into how do I tackle different issues, right? Instead of just exercising for muscle and whatnot, which is great, is a wonderful thing. But if you're going through menopause, then are there specific types of exercises that are better for you at this point in time? And if you have more time, just do everything. Why not? So cardiovascular or aerobic exercise seems to be most helpful with hot flashes and night sweats because it supports body temperature regulation, it supports homeostasis, and it's a whole body situation where blood flow is increased to all parts of your body, including your brain. And it also helps with memory support and brain fog. It helps clear your head. So something to keep in mind. I actually invested in a little, what's it called? It's not a
Like a
train.
stair stepper?
It's the stair tapper. Thank you.
Yep.
I have it right
Like
here.
the little one? I have one too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who recommended it to me? JJ Virgin. Just the other day. What to me? Do you have this? What's it called?
Stair stepper.
Yeah, but she mentioned a specific brand that I shouldn't.
Oh,
yeah.
I'll be
Anyway,
honest.
stair stepper.
I saw mine on social media, and I bought it on Amazon.
Oh, me too on Amazon.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I have 20 minutes. I just 300 calories. It's amazing. It's very motivating, and it's a good way to move. But anyway, there are many different ways to increase your heart rate that are actually fun and don't have to take a day. Then the other one is strength training, which I'm hearing is very popular on social media. And more recently, it's getting attention in science and medicine as well, because it's not only helpful to support bone density and metabolic activity in the body and brain, it also supports mood during menopause, during the transition to menopause. It seems to ease depressive symptoms and make you just feel better overall. So that's really nice to know. It's also good for you overall, of course. And then the last one is strength, like flexibility and more like conditioning. Exercise like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, which are very helpful to relax and to support flexibility, of course, but also for sleep. So this is something, again, thinking about sleep. I do yoga a lot. And I also bought a reformer.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I have it downstairs. So I have no excuses. I just need to go downstairs. It's right there. And I'm loving it. So, because my sleep is not so great. Also, I like Pilates, but my sleep is really not great. So there are many things that one can do. And I think I have a little list in the chapter on an exercise with all the things I found could be helpful from different women as well. They're also sustainable, because I find that there's this image of a successful, active, physically active person where you have to go to the gym and lift hard and run a marathon. Sometimes we just set these impossible standards where you just go to the gym and drive yourself mad for 2 weeks, and then you just can't sustain it. Or maybe women who are a little bit, no, after menopause is harder. It takes longer to recover from an injury. It's easier to get maybe a little, you can pull your muscle in your back and then that's it. for weeks. So it's important to do something that is sustainable, where you can see effects and feel better, but you can also keep doing it over time. Consistency really is key when it comes to brain health.
I love that. Just as you said, make it approachable and sustainable.
Yeah. Don't set yourself up for failure. Don't set these impossible targets then you just can't maintain, because then you feel bad about yourself and then you just won't go back. So yeah, it's good to cheer yourselves up.
I love that. All right. Well, I want to end, of course, on hormone replacement therapy because in the book, you said HRT works best while our bodies are still receptive to estrogen, those estrogen receptors that you mentioned. But in your experience and with your imaging, especially estrogen, using estrogen for the women who want to choose to, what do you see? What have you noticed?
Well, that's a really good question. So all the clinical trials that have been done looking at hormone therapy using brain scans are all done after menopause. So it's incredible that there are no clinical trials of hormone therapy done on perimenopausal women with or without brain scans. Can you believe that?
Wow. Unfortunately, I can. It still makes me sad.
It's very sad. So what we know from other studies is that hormone therapy does work best if you take it to support your transition to menopause and in response to symptoms. So actually, hormone therapy was developed for perimenopause at the beginning, at least in theory by scientists, because what you want to do is regulate hormonal concentration. So instead of being fluctuating and being all over the place during the transition, if you supplement, you might be able to keep it even. So that was the idea. But then in clinical practice, hormones were given almost exclusively to women who were postmenopausal. So at least 1 year with no menstrual cycles and no periods. Now things have changed, and professional guidelines do not restrict the use of hormone therapy to postmenopausal women. So I think that could be a great asset for women who are perimenopausal, because that's really when the most severe symptoms can occur, is before menopause, not after. So I think it's important to know that. And unfortunately, a lot of women will go to their gynecologists and say, I'm having all these symptoms. Can you help me out? Can you give me something? And they will say, well, you still have a menstrual cycle, so come back to me in a year. And thankfully, things are changing. And there is an understanding that you use hormone therapy for the symptoms, right? To feel better and alleviate the symptoms. Now, hormone therapy is recommended and indicated, which is important. It's approved for 4 things: hot flashes, night sweats, prevention of osteoporosis, and relief of genital urinary symptoms, which are vaginal dryness is a big issue for so many women, and recurrent UTIs. Hormone therapy is also used off-label for support of sleep disturbances during perimenopause and early postmenopause, especially, or sometimes exclusively, if the sleep issues are associated with hot flashes and night sweats. That depends on your provider. And also for relief of mild depressive symptoms during perimenopause and postmenopause, not to be confused with the diagnosis of major depression. That's a different thing. So it's important to go to a clinician. You need to know which type of depression you have, because if it's hormonal, you'll respond to hormone therapy. If it's not menopause, then it's best to go for antidepressants or other therapies, perhaps just therapy without pharmaceuticals or a combination of things. The interesting thing is that you can actually take both together. So you can do estrogen therapy and antidepressants if needed. I am also very interested in potentially using hormone therapy for brain fog. It is not currently approved for this use, but there's more and more research showing that there may be a good effect. We just published, I think it's the largest meta-analysis. It's an integrative analysis of all available data, looking at the effects of hormone therapy for cognitive performance in women of menopausal age. And it does seem to help, especially for women who go through surgical menopause. A lot of what I do is really just consolidate what women are saying, and everybody's just like, of course. They say, yeah, that was 3 years of my life, but yes, of course.
But we need it published. That's why we love you so much. And you also in your book too, and obviously a lot of women are concerned about hormones and cancer risk, and thankfully that cruise ship is turning the other way and to show that's not the case. But you do also point out, be aware of lifestyle risk, such as alcohol. And alcohol is a very common choice for women to improve their anxiety or to reduce their stress or to try to fall asleep. And yet we know, you more than anyone else, the effect of alcohol on the body and brain, and then further risk.
Yeah, alcohol is very dehydrating. That's actually the function of alcohol. And it has a dehydrating effect on the brain. So I don't drink any alcohol at all, never. It's funny because in Italy, you're legally allowed to drink alcohol when you're 18, whereas here it's 21, right? So I drank a little bit socially here and there when I was 18, and that was fully done by 21. When everybody just started drinking, it was like, no, thanks, I'm done. No more. And I haven't had a drop of alcohol since, which is kind of funny. Nobody believes it. But yeah, so I think it's important to be aware that risks are never absolute. Right? A risk is relative. So it's important to put all that data in context, because you hear in the news that HRT was associated with an increased risk of breast cancer. And that is very, very, very frightening. And from the Women's Health Initiative, which has been disproven, but at least in older women, some specific type of hormone therapies, which was, to be clear, it was high doses of oral conjugated equine estrogens together with a specific synthetic progesterone called MPA. That specific regimen was associated with an almost 30% increased risk of breast cancer, which sounds like a lot. But that's a relative risk, right? It's just the risk of the group who was taking hormones relative to the group of women who were on placebo. If you look at the risk relative to other things that increase the risk of cancer, is actually quite small. So the risk with that specific type of hormone therapy is actually lower than the risk of breast cancer associated with leading a sedentary life, or drinking 2 glasses of wine a day, or having high breast density. The risk of breast cancer for women with high breast density is almost 12 times that a hormone therapy for menopause, or being a flight attendant. The risk is that, or taking statins, right? Statins are a very common cholesterol-lowering medication that actually is associated with an increased risk of breast cancer, which nobody seems to know about, which is higher and larger than that of hormone therapy. I'm not pushing HRT on anyone. It's just saying it's important to put the risks in context, because some women have a higher risk tolerance, some women have no risk tolerance or a lower risk tolerance, and that's totally fine. And what's important is to have the data so that every woman can make an informed choice based on her own risks and needs and symptoms and tolerance towards risks, right? I think whatever you choose to do, whether it's nothing or everything or something in between, absolutely. Let's just focus on things that we have data for. The studies have been done to really measure those risks and the effects and the benefits, and then talk about the ratio of risk and benefits. And that is an informed, empowered conversation that I think every woman has a right to have.
And on that, I think that's the perfect ending to the podcast, because I absolutely 100% agree with you. And I'm so glad, first of all, that you wrote, well, all of your books, but this book, The Menopause Brain. I am so honored that you came onto the Root Cause Medicine podcast today. Please let everybody know, besides your book, where they can find you.
They can find me on Instagram. It's Dr. _Mosconi, Mosconi. And my website is probably the easiest way. It's lisamosconi.com.
Amazing. We will have all of that information in the show notes. Again, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of our heart from coming on today and breaking down all of your research, your book, giving us such amazing scientific and clinical pearls. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.